What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into MLS Digest. The opening weekend of the 30th MLS season is here. 2025 match week 1 has arrived this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We have 15 matches spread across these 2 days, 13 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and a lot of matchups that are very, very tasty. And we're here to preview each and every one of them, provide analysis, updates on all these teams. If you haven't been updated yet on new players and everything else that has happened with these teams over the off season. And of course, it may not be as predictable as some might think for this opening weekend with these new players potentially not playing right away, getting acclimated to their clubs. Every team and situation is different, but here to give you updates and everything you need to know for these first opening weekend matchups, and of course also provide some best bets. Now, if you are interested in the best bets, then just want to go over the 2024 recap last regular season, in which we went up over 27 units, which I think is a pretty good return. And obviously the betting aspect is pretty small part of the show. It's just for fun. If you are interested, I just like to include that and let you guys know what I am taking. And I think, we do a good job of picking our spots, and just, it's just another fun way to enjoy the league. It's really all it should be. And, we did good for ourselves. So in this video, specifically for this opening weekend, I'm only going to have 3 best bets, and, that'll be listed. I'll go through those as they come. But obviously, like I said, just another side part of the show and the previews we do week by week. And if you are interested in the best bets, though, if I do have any more additions week by week that are not on the show, I like to make those like on the day of the games as we learn more about lineups, because sometimes, maybe even for this opening weekend as well, the lineup situations might not be so clear, and that can impact whether or not I might go from a lean or a 50-50 on maybe making a certain bet to actually making one or not. So if you are interested in that as well, be on the lookout and follow the Twitter at MLS Digest if you're interested. And let's just get straight into this opening weekend of MLS and the preview. Saturday's first matchup features LAFC taking on Minnesota in the early window at 4:30 Eastern. And the first game actually of the entire slate was supposed to be Miami versus NYCFC, but because Miami's Champions Cup game against Kansas City got postponed by a day, their game against NYCFC is not postponed till later at night on Saturday. So we kick things off with LAFC versus Minnesota. LAFC already played a competitive match as well in Champions Cup, going on the road to the Rapids midweek and losing 2-1. They have that second leg after this game midweek. So despite some schedule congestion for these teams in the early rounds of Champions Cup, it's literally the start of the season. These players are fresh and ready to go. I don't think there's going to be, over rotating or anything like that. These players are completely fine, and that shouldn't really affect lineups for specifically this match between their 2 legs of the Champions Cup and going forward, at least for the first month or so. And I think LAFC, with the rotations, Giroud and Ordaz started at striker and right wing in that Champions Cup game. I think we see at least David Martinez on that right wing starting this game. Under probably won't be ready to go, I don't think, for the first game or two. Still getting acclimated. That was such a recent transfer. And I'm interested to see if Abosi starts this game. I'm really high on him this season in this system. I think he fits the system well, and the pace that he can bring alongside Bouanga and the way they like to get out on the break. I think he's had some issues with his finishing sometimes, but I think the chances he's going to get in this type of system, the type of positions he's going to be in, and the space he's going to have really, really suits him. And I think he's a perfect fit for this team, especially taking that pressure off Giroud for some of the minutes that he has to play. Now, as for Minnesota, they bring back basically the entire team from last year. A lot of continuity there under Ramsey now in his second season, and it's a clear system that they want to play with that back 3 or 5 with the wingbacks. And, they did their solid business in the summer transfer window mid-season, and their DPs, Pereira and Yeboah, hit the ground running. It's, like I said, most of the same team. They're very comfortable with each other. Oluwase is healthy. Hlongwane, they have some very solid players, some very solid finishers, and they know the system that they run, and got their best ever playoff finish, made it to the second round last year. So A lot of people are very, very high on Minnesota this year. I am too. I think they're going to be very, very solid, and they have a solid roster. Um, and they can give LAFC a run for their money here. I think they played them tightly last year as well. I believe they won at home, and then on the road they lost in this same fixture last year, but it was a closer game, I think, than the scoreline suggested. A little bit of unluckiness there. But regardless, I think there's going to be a little bit of rust on LAFC's side. I don't fully trust this, things to be figured out completely right away. Obviously, they get out in stretches mid or late season and they run the table at certain points, but sometimes we see them kind of maybe taking a couple, weeks or so to really get into form. So I think with these new additions and everything, that kind of youth on the right wing right now without Under, it could be a little bit shaky. And I'm going for a draw here. I think this one ends 2-2. Moving on to the late night main slate, which starts with Atlanta and Montreal on Saturday. This was last season's wild card matchup in the East, where Atlanta beat Montreal on penalties, I believe. And we get this matchup right away to start the 2025 season. Atlanta, if not the best, one of the best winter transfer windows, signing Latte Lath, Almiron, a club legend, coming back still in good age. Moranchuk from last summer, and then also getting Click in that midfield to pair alongside Sleesh from DC United. So besides all that, already have Saba, like I said, Moranchuk, and then more solid depth options on those wings and in center forward, Tiare, Mosquera, Jean de Silva. This is looking to be one of, if not the best attacks in the entire league that is going to score bunches of goals, and I'm taking them early here. I think Atlanta gets this one done. And despite the fact that actually Latte Lath is not expected to start in this game, maybe he, features late off the bench. Who knows for how many minutes, but he has been dealing with his own injury at the end of his time in Middlesbrough. He did come back and I think play a little bit before actually being transferred to Atlanta, but has only been really training on the side the past week, and they're kind of easing him back in. But regardless, Tiare is a fine option up top, and he's going to be getting chances. He was key to their upset over Miami and has been in the club. So I think even with Tiare up there, the players around him, everyone else should be ready to go and healthy. And it should be an attack that's primed for, starting off the season well. Especially it's going to be a packed house from the reports. Basically a sellout crowd after basically the last season and a half or so of really dead crowds compared to what Atlanta is used to in its history. And the energy in the building is back. The whole infrastructure and project is there again. There's a clear vision, and they're just simply looking to be one of the apex contenders in this conference and the league. So for this game, my first best bet of the entire 2025 season is Atlanta to win on the money line, and then over 1.5 goals, minus 120. This is one of three best bets, like I mentioned before. And the thought process there, is pretty simple. I'm trusting this Atlanta side, like I talked about. This attack is looking to outscore you multiple goals a game. The quality is there. They might, get caught out in transition sometimes because of how attack oriented they might get, but I still like that addition of Click now to help Sleesh in that midfield. And Montreal is just a super, super young team. I think they're going to have their own growing pains and the same struggles almost as last year, and they will be without Vrioni, their transfer DP striker from the Revs, for the first couple of games or weeks or so. And so that's a big loss up top when your other options really are not true center forwards with Caden Clark and Bryce Duke, and then a much younger team as well surrounding those players in midfield. So while they might try to make it tough, I just think Atlanta will anyways need multiple goals to win this game, because they do run that risk of, maybe giving up a goal on their own transition. And so I think it's a solid price for what is going to be an insanely, energetic game, and the energy in that building is going to be crazy. I think this team is ready to go, and it's a weak opponent that they get to, potentially, hopefully get their first 3 points on the board against. Next up, Cincy takes on New York Red Bulls in its home opener. Cincy already played in Champions Cup as well, away to Motagua, and got a 4-1 win. Both their new signings, the big money signings in Denke and Evander, featured. Denke started and Evander played about, I think, 35, 40-ish minutes, and just blowing the doors off that team already, getting a good start to the season with that 4-1 win. Denke got a goal, and then Evander got a goal and an assist. So they've already played some, decent minutes to be a little bit fresher in some actual competitive play. And they get to host the Red Bulls, who are really healthy going into the season as well. And, my concern with the Red Bulls is just that they're not really built to be one of these table-topping regular season teams. They will play you tough, they will press, and they will not make it easy. But they do have some old players on their roster, obviously, especially their two DPs in Forsberg and now Choupo-Moting. And so I'm not really trusting Red Bull to get off the mark right away. They're going to have their own struggles depending on injuries throughout the season to some of these guys that cannot play consistent minutes. But that is not to say that I don't, believe in the system and that they are not a tough out, because they will still be, probably a competitive team at some points. But I think Cincy, didn't strain themselves too much in that, midweek win. And this tie is basically already over, since the second leg after this game is coming back to Cincy. And I think they're not really going to rotate too much, and they're going to focus on starting this MLS season hot. I think they're going to beat the Red Bulls 2-0 or something along those lines, because they're also returning, even though Miazga and Hagelin are not just back yet on that back line, probably about a month or so away or two. Still, you got Miles Robinson healthy, Hadebe, and then you could run your wingbacks. And yeah, this team is looking scary already. I think at home especially, they're going to get off the mark soon and early, and Red Bulls might try and make it a little bit tough and keep it a little uninteresting in terms of the chances because of the style of play they run. But I'm going with Cincy to win this one 2-0. Moving on in the East, it's the Crew taking on the Fire. And the Crew enter this season with such little attacking depth after getting rid of Cucho and Christian Ramirez. Besides that, the rest of the team is relatively the same. They haven't made any signings with the money they got, especially from Cucho. And it's going to be a tough struggle, despite Nancy's best efforts, I think. That's why I have them in 5th, I believe it was, in my Eastern Conference prediction videos. I think Nancy's system will still get the best out of all these players, and they're still going to produce some good results. But they're not going to be this dominant team, I think, because you just cannot replace that quality sometimes, and they're really going to have to hit on those signings. But those signings are not here yet. And so it's hard to see where most of the goals will be coming from. It's going to have to be by committee, I think, especially with how this roster just looks right now. It's really just Diego Rossi, Russell Rowe, and honestly, besides that, it's kind of unproven, attacking talent in MLS. And so it takes on a Fire team that is completely revamped with now Jonathan Bamba, Zinkernagel, and Brian Gutierrez pulling the strings, and then a much better defense with Jack Elliott sliding in at one of those center back spots. And, maybe it might be some bias in me, but I think the Fire have a real shot here, despite the odds being very much in the Crew's favor on the books, getting minus 200 and even, higher. And I just don't really see it. Obviously, Nancy is the best coach in MLS, and he can make the most out of what he has right now. But I think the Fire have a real shot here to make things difficult. They have the attacking talent to actually, finish some of their chances that they will create. And they could definitely give the Crew a run for their money here. So maybe it might take some time for this new group for the Fire to also get implemented. But I think a draw is in order here. It's really standing out to me. I don't think the Crew will, be as dominant and put as much pressure on teams this season without having those real killers up front that they had before. So it's going to be a struggle for them at some periods. I'm predicting it to start a little bit early as well. And so I'm going for a 1-1 draw between these two teams. Next up is probably the worst game of the entire Match Week 1 slate. between two teams that finished outside the playoffs last season, and I'm predicting to finish even lower than their positions from last season. I have Toronto actually as the wooden spoon winners, and DC, I think, second to last in the East. So these are simply two teams with such terrible roster construction and the type of restraints they have that they really couldn't do much in the winter transfer window over the offseason. And their DPs, or the deals their DPs are on, are kind of tying them down, specifically with Toronto. And Insigne, Bernadeschi, on their day can win you a match in like a 1-0, 2-1, like whatever, with some brilliant strike, which we've seen, but just really not these serious players week in, week out in terms of that production, and are far too constantly injured to really, help this team make a push and lift this roster up above the sum of its parts. So DC as well. It's literally just Benteke left, coming off that Golden Boot season, but this roster got worse. Got rid of McVay, got rid of Click, one of their DPs who they're still paying or have as a DP on their books. Once again, just the worst deal of the offseason. I have no idea how they could do that and just let Atlanta basically get him for almost free. And the rest of the roster is just built around the wingback play, getting Benteke, service, which I'm sure he will still score tons of goals this year because he's just a complete anomaly in this league with his physicality, his presence in the box. But regardless, neither of these two teams are going to be fun to watch this season. And, this is one that they need points right away from both of them, because those 3 points will be very, very valuable, and they probably won't come very often for the rest of the season. I'm just going to give Toronto the edge here. I think they maybe just have the better midfield, better roster. But that's really not saying much. I'm going to say 2-1 in this one for Toronto. Next up, it's the Supporter Shield champions of last season taking on NYCFC. Miami for their home opener here after beating Kansas City in the first leg of Champions Cup action 1-0 on the road. They take that into the second leg later this week at home. And Messi with that late winner in sub-zero temperatures. And, honestly, I didn't really make too much of their offseason moves. Obviously changed coaches. Now it's Mascherano. We still have to see what type of system he's going to implement. But you got rid of Campagna. Now you really don't have true center forward depth behind Suarez, and added Fafa Picault, who I am, high on. I think that's a solid winger that can eat up a lot of minutes for them, which is good because obviously a lot of that roster is old and they're going to need that. But I'm not sure they got, tremendously better. We still have to see about Allende, and still, this team will still get by, still be a top team in the East regardless, because they have Messi, they have Suarez, and they will win you matches even when things might be going tough sometimes. And they did have some tough matches against NYCFC last year. Both were 1-1 draws. They've kind of just played them tough, just like Atlanta has. And, just a frustrating club. But with NYCFC, I don't have them making the playoffs this year. I don't think they're going to be, all that good, because as it stands now, they don't have Santi Rodriguez, their 10, and, have not replaced him yet. And that's the guy that pulled all the strings. You still have Alonso Martinez and Maxi Morales, but, it's a good spine, a good back line, and Matt Freese, but I don't know where the offensive production is coming from, where the transition kind of those final balls are getting sent, who is sending those in, and who's going to be the playmaker on this team now. Because besides that, it's still sort of a pretty youngish roster that obviously did make the second round of the playoffs last year, but on the road against Miami, despite the fact that they've been, kind of a thorn in their side, I don't think Miami is really going to rotate too much, and they should have really no problem in this home opener. I think they get by with about a 3-1 scoreline, because, they're probably always due to give up a goal here or there. Orlando taking on Philly Union in another Eastern matchup. And Orlando brings back most of the same team, essentially, besides the big loss in Facundo Torres on the right wing, who went to Palmeiras. They signed Marco Pasalic as a replacement, the 24-year-old on the right wing. But it's going to be so hard to make up that type of production. And now also with Duncan McGuire out for at least a couple months because of his shoulder surgery, that limits your striker depth because Luis Muriel is only getting older. He seems like a bust so far after his first season in MLS. But Enrique will be the starting striker, and he's looked very, very good so far. So you still have a solid, attacking trio there. You have Angulo, Ojeda, Enrique, and then they also signed Nicolas Rodriguez on an under-22 who can also maybe play on the right as well as Pasalic. So I think it's more of the same for Orlando. I don't think they're going to be particularly, amazing or particularly bad. They're going to be somewhere mid-table, I think. And under Pareja, that's usually been the case. They know how to trudge along through a season, and they just have a lot of continuity. So it's not like anything crazy has happened besides, replacing Torres or trying to this offseason. Meanwhile, for Philly, like I previewed in the Eastern Conference video, it's going to be tough sledding for them this season. New coach in Carnell, and a lot of reliance on youth minutes because that's just the way they're set up. They lost a lot of key players, including Elliott, McGlynn, and although they do still have their top striker options in Baribo and Ure, and then Gazdag supporting them, I think they're getting older on that back line, even though they have those veteran presences, and I just don't trust that midfield as it stands at the moment. And there's too many question marks going into the season, so much change, and it's just not a good outlook for them. I think Orlando will get by in this opener and are the far more, well-oriented and the team with much more chemistry right now than the Union. And so I'm going to go for a 2-0 Orlando victory. Going over to the Western Conference now, Austin home opener against Kansas City. Sporting KC, who just played against Miami, like we talked about in Champions Cup, lost 1-0 in that first leg at home, and now they have to go to Miami for the second leg down a goal. It's looking already over for what I think is going to be the bottom team in the West. Just not a strong squad from front to back. Really the only, solid players now are their most recent signings, which is obviously Joveljic and Manu Garcia, the 10, but Garcia is still unproven. I'm really going to have to see it first. And I don't think is going to have too much of an instant impact. And Joveljic needs really good service, and the players around him I just don't think are up to par to help him have a really good goal scoring season as much as I'd like him personally or individually. But on Austin's side of things, they spent so much money this offseason on Brandon Vasquez, Mirto Uzuni, and then also their midfield, Ilya Sanchez, Sabovic, Dubersarski. I mean, that is a lot of potential in that midfield, and also obviously Danny Pereira, has been there, and so I think this midfield will control the game easily and has enough attacking potential to provide that front line, which actually I have to say will probably be without Uzuni because he's barely gotten to Austin in the past week, and probably a process there in terms of acclimating him to the team. And so you still have Obrian, who's been there on the left with Bukhari and Vasquez. So I think that's still very doable. And that's where I'm going with this game, as you can see at the bottom. For my second best bet out of the three on this slate, I have Austin on the money line, or Austin to win, -120. I think this crowd has been starved of any type of a good team in Austin for at least a couple of years now, but they show out when they actually do good. It's a great environment, and I think for this home opener, they've obviously earned the trust of the fans, I think, back to have this be basically a packed house, and it's going to be a great environment against the Kansas City team that I just don't think is going to compete in a lot of games this season. I think Vermees should be gone, like I've mentioned a lot, and even without Uzuni, I think this Austin side will have no trouble getting off the mark, getting their first 3 points. I think it's a fantastic spot for them. And honestly, can't really harp on about, like I said, the schedule congestion for KC, like with the 2 midweek games, this one being in between those two, because actually I might honestly even favor Kansas City that they've gotten some competitive action ahead of them since it is literally the start of the season. So not to like talk out of my bet, but regardless, you know, I just don't see this Kansas City squad scoring plenty of goals anyways. Garcia maybe could help that along the line, but I think it's still just too early. He only played 30 minutes in that Champions Cup game. And I think Austin gets off the board here, or gets off the mark. And yeah, they should have no trouble getting past this KC side. Next up is a Texas derby between Dynamo and Dallas to start the season in Houston. And it's a tough one to call. Dynamo, with a lot of the same players, didn't really make too many moves. The problem was that they got rid of some key midfielders in Cascadia and Herrera. They did get McGlynn from Philly, which is a great young pickup to help in that midfield. But regardless, really nothing in terms of the attacking additions. And it's really just Ponce on an island out there with no wing play to help him. And I think that's going to be why Houston, misses out on the playoffs this season, unless they do make moves down the line. But you can't really, predict that or rely on that. How well they'll manage those moves if they do make any. At the moment, I think they're just really starved of any type of wing play, any type of attacking penetration to take the attention off of Ponce. And so they're going to be this team with a lot of possession, just like last year, but probably a bit of boring gameplay because they really are just going to be in these same passing patterns, and it's going to be a little bit too predictable because they don't really have that flair, the types of players to kind of take people on one-on-one and win these types of duels. And so everything is kind of going to be in front of them in terms of their attacking play. And on Dallas' side of things, it's a roster overhaul almost. A lot of players left. Their defense still looks pretty poor, just like last year. And their best defender left in Tafari. But they did sign, obviously, the big one, Lucho Acosta, and Anderson Julio to supplement Musa up there. And so that is a lot of attacking talent across the board. And that midfield is okay still, despite a departure or two. And so, I think they're going to be in a lot of high-scoring affairs because of the way I think they're going to set up and play. But it's still yet to see under Eric Quill and a new manager and all that. So it's a hard one to predict. I think it's going to be a tight one. But I'm just going to lean towards the attacking talent just to take over here in the meantime, just to start the season. I think Dallas does get the upset in this one, 2-1. Back to the East we go, and it's Nashville taking on the Revs from New England. And Nashville really didn't do too much to change the roster. Still have the same DPs, Mukhtar, Surridge, and Zimmerman. And going into now, after a half a year of BJ Callahan as the coach, with a bit of a different identity than before, with a lot of pressing involved. But I'm not sure they still have this roster to be very successful in terms of the attacking output. And they did get a couple signings in the midfield, including Gaston Brugman, but he is going to be out for this one. And a lot of youth as well, kind of on the wings. And then they also got rid of Shaq Morris. So that is a big loss on that right-hand side of the wingback play. So I'm not really sure what to expect from Nashville. I mean, I still don't see them making the playoffs. I still just think, Mukhtar's best days are behind him, despite the fact he might be probably leading this team in goals anyways. And with the Revs as well, I think they entered this season better than last season. Defensively, still probably suspect, but made a couple of signings back there that could shore up some things, get them to, sneak into a wild card spot like I predict. And besides that, I like their attacking talent more. They got Campagna from Miami, which is a very, very solid striker signing compared to Vrioni, who, was pretty inconsistent. And then you got Ganago coming from Nantes, who could play on the left or as a supplementing striker. And then Langoni, who came during the summer and really had no time, took no time to get going. He looks very, very dynamic on that wing. And Carles Hill pulling the strings. Even though they lost Bayrak-Tarovic, going to have to kind of mix and match who's going to be on that left wing because Chancalay is out for a month or two. And so that's a big issue, that left-hand side. So it may be easier for Nashville to focus defensively on, one kind of lane. But this is one that's also hard to call. Two teams that are looking to rebound from, non-playoff years last season. And I just don't think either is going to get going and put their mark on this game. So I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Next up, St. Louis hosts the Rapids. And my third best bet for this show is in this game. I'm going with the over 3.5 goals at plus 120. It is a lot of goals, but St. Louis, we know at the second half of last season, despite the fact that they were so far down in the standings at that point that they could not make up the point gap to make the playoffs, this attack was absolutely electric with all the Germans they added: Tykert, Hartel, Lowen pulling the strings. You have João Klaus or Betcher as well up top. And the only issue with this specific game, though, is Tykert probably, honestly, very likely won't be starting, maybe makes the bench. He's been going through getting his green card processed, so that's kind of an issue, at least for this first game. But regardless, they still have, plenty of attacking options and a very, very healthy squad going into this one. I still am not high on their defense. And Berkey can obviously save them out of a lot of high danger chances because he's just a fantastic goalie. But I think they're still going to get in these back and forth games. And I'm not too worried about, Tykert missing, because this team, for the most part, has a lot of chemistry from the second half of last season, and it's mostly the same team, as last season. And then with Colorado, they already played in a competitive match, winning against LAFC in their first leg of Champions Cup. Georgi Mihailovic got a brace in that one with a penalty and a beautiful free kick. And I think that actually is going to help them rather than hinder them. It's the start of the season, like I mentioned, and I think it actually helps them, and they're going to be fresh and ready to go. And this was a team that actually had the best attacking metrics, if I remember correctly, on the road in terms of their expected goals and everything. And they also just got into just unbelievably high scoring games on the road every time. So a big problem for them in those games as well, as to why they gave up so many goals and why they kind of were poor in the last kind of phase of the regular season last year, was because of their defensive midfield and the options that were not there. But now they signed Josh Atencio from the Sounders. They have Ronan, but both of them will be out for this one. Atencio is still acclimating to the team, so that's going to take a little bit of time. And then Ronan missed that midweek game because he got injured in a practice before then, so he's probably doubtful for this one. And then also, I believe they're basically without both their wingbacks, because Vines has been out, and now Reggie Cannon also got injured in that game. It looked bad at the time of it, but I don't think he's going to miss like a significant amount of time, which is obviously good for them long term. But here he's going to be missing. I think they did get much better in terms of the center backs because of that trade with Cincy for Awazim and Murphy, which is definitely a big help. But I think their style is not going to change here, and their attack is pretty much fully healthy, minus Cudi Pietro, who has still not played with the team really in a competitive game because he just got picked up and he's dealing with recovering from surgery. So the same attack basically returns from last season with Navarro, Bassett, Mihailovic, Cabral, Calvin Harris. These are good young players who have already played together and were very successful last season under Armas, and they're looking to continue that. And the games between these two last season as well also, were very, very high scoring. And Colorado actually, I think it was like 3-0 the last time they went to St. Louis last season. So I just don't think Colorado especially will change their approach on the road. But I think this is also a spot that, even though they got better defensively, St. Louis at home gets its own home bump and can kind of have an advantage or take advantage of the fact that Colorado's defensive mid options are actually not available for this game. So I expect more goals and more of the same as we saw from these teams last season to start this 2025 season. Moving on over to one of the two very late slate games in the Western Conference, starting with the Earthquakes, last year's wooden spoon winners for the least amount of points, taking on Real Salt Lake, who were third in the West last season. They did go on the road in a Champions Cup match, but very uninspiring performance. It was a very dull game in a 0-0 draw away to a team from, honestly, I don't remember right now, some South American team, I believe. And yeah, this is an interesting one. I think San Jose has to be favored in this one because of all the pickups they made. Obviously, that being Josef Martinez or Rongo. It's going to be interesting to see how they line up, though, how Bruce Arena lines this team up, if they want to run two strikers or how they fit all these players into this system with obviously Hernan Lopez, Pellegrino, Espinoza still remaining with the team. Got a little bit more depth in midfield now, but that back line still screams, that they're going to be in a lot of trouble defensively, and they're going to have to, get in high-scoring games. But at least they'll actually be productive and live up, I think, to their potential in the attacking phase rather than how they were and fared last season. So on RSL side of things, just lost so many players, and the depth there is just non-existent. Arango gets to play his old team in RSL here, and it's really just Diego Luna and a dream with Marchuk or Brook on the right, and it's really just been stripped for parts here, RSL, and it just seems like it's gonna be a very frustrating season. I have them missing out on the playoffs. It's been a just 180 turnaround compared to the depth and the attacking talent they had on this team, at the summer transfer window point of last season. And so I just think, especially with that midweek game in hand, and trying to probably advance through Champions Cup since it's 0-0 going back to their home leg, I think maybe they just are not going to be ready for this game. I think San Jose gets off the mark here and squeaks out a win. I'm going to go for a 2-1 win. I think San Jose, even though RSL is really lacking some attacking options, San Jose's defense I just really can't trust for clean sheets, especially after considering last season. I don't think Bruce Arena is going to fix that and the lack of kind of competence they have, for lack of a better term, on that back line. The last game of Saturday's huge slate features the Sounders hosting Charlotte. Sounders coming off a big away win in Champions Cup play, a 3-1 victory, which they will take back to their home leg after this game. And two teams here that were basically top five, especially Charlotte, I think the best defensive team in the entire league. It's what both teams pride themselves on, is just completely being solid from the back and then worrying about the rest later. And both teams actually, they underperformed in a sense, and weren't really apex contenders because of their lack of attacking options and true talent and match winners up there. But they're both in similar situations because they remained with similar squads, but they simply got better in some form in the attacking side of things in their roster, with the Sounders getting Ferreira from Dallas, and then Charlotte getting Wilfred Zaha, obviously, on the left, and then re-signing Pep Biel as that cam. And now you have Abada and Adjumang. So hopefully, the hope for both of these teams is that they simply just get a little bit better in some sense, at the very least, in the attacking phase of things. And they're looking to just take that next step and actually be contenders in their respective conferences. And it's hard to call this one. It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment phase with Ferreira. I think he did get an assist in that Champions Cup game already because he played. But Charlotte hasn't had a competitive match yet. They have to go on a long trip here all the way to the West Coast. And, they're not as dominant, of course. No MLS team is as dominant as they are on the road as at home. But Charlotte really has a fortress at home. They still play teams tough on the road, but usually can crumble in some situations. So I think this is going to be maybe not low eventful, but a lower scoring game. It's going to be a feeling out process, and it's hard to call, but I think I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw in this one, especially considering Seattle and the congestion they have, despite even the fact that they probably already have put that tie away to bed and don't really have to worry about the second leg. I still think it's going to be hard for these new signings to really make a difference right away. But both these teams for sure are better on the attacking end of things. But yeah, once again, I say 1-1. We go on over to now Sunday's slate, which is only consisting of two matches, one earlier on, 4 Eastern, and then the other one being this new addition for MLS's schedule, a primetime Sunday night game every week, which we'll get to after this one. But this is the first one on Sunday, and it's a classic or, Cascadian derby here with the Timbers and the Whitecaps. And this is also another one that's crazy because now we're getting two matches in the first week that were in each conference's wildcard game. We had Atlanta, Montreal, and now we're getting Timbers, Whitecaps. And this was when Whitecaps beat the brakes off them in that wildcard game that they were actually supposed to host, but they had to play at the Timbers because they scheduled a different sort of event at their stadium because they were expecting to do better because of how their season was going last season. And then they just completely crumbled and slipped all the way down to the wild card game. But regardless, they beat the brakes off Portland 5-0 in that game. And I am leaning towards taking the Whitecaps here, despite the fact that I'm not high on either of these teams. I have both missing the playoffs, as I alluded to in the Western Conference video. Whitecaps coming off a kind of shocking and embarrassing loss the other day to Saprissa on the road in Champions Cup play. They went up 1-0 off Ryan Gauld and then gave up a equalizer early in the second half and then gave up a stoppage time winner in that first leg. So now they return to Vancouver looking to bring that tie back, and they have this game in between that. But the Timbers dealing with so many problems of their own. The reason I have them out of the playoffs is simple. They were barely a playing team with Evander, and now they lost Evander. They replaced him with David DaCosta, but who knows if he can live up to that level of production. And they also have Jonathan Rodriguez out for, a couple more weeks at the very least, and Santi Moreno won't be playing here. He's also a week or two away from coming back. That leaves you with DaCosta, who knows if he's acclimated enough in time. Will he start? Probably won't be an instant impact. Anthony, and then probably Felipe Mora. And then the rest is still kind of an old midfield. And most of the same back line, which shipped so many goals, which was the reason why they only made a wild card spot. And, I think they're going to ship just as many goals and probably not be as productive offensively because Evander will not be the one pulling the strings. And they're probably, I'm assuming, probably under Neville, still going to run that risk. That's still going to be their style. They're going to be very back and forth. And I just don't think it's going to work out for them and pay off as it did with Evander because that's someone you almost cannot replace. And we're going to have to see it first out of DaCosta, what he can bring to this team. But this team just simply isn't fully healthy anyways outside of that, their number 10 situation. And I'm going to give the edge to Vancouver just slightly here, but that I'm not really confident in them either because that team is just a very average roster. It's just Gauld, Brian White. They did sign Daniel Rios. But regardless, what they lack for in talent, they put in with that effort. But I think Vanni Sartini probably got the best out of that system and the roster they're limited to at the moment. And they didn't make many changes. And now with this new coach, I just don't think it's gonna be a good season for them. I think they're way past their time of contending, just specifically with this roster. So regardless, I'm not confident in this pick, but I'm gonna go with a 2-0 win for Vancouver. More of the same from that wild card thrashing at the end of last season. Last but not least, the Sunday primetime match at 7 Eastern is the defending champions LA Galaxy taking on the new boys on the block, San Diego FC, in their inaugural season. And it's a proper California derby, a new one, first of its kind, with now San Diego joining the fold. And it's kind of a trial by fire here to enter the league for San Diego, but it is a weakened LA Galaxy side. No Ricky Puig for, probably 3/4 of this season, and Payne's still out for a couple months to start this season. And they lost a couple players. They lost Neal on the back line. They lost Delgado to their other rivals, LAFC. And they did make replacements for also Jovic leaving, with Christian Ramirez coming from the Crew, and then Nascimento, a under-22 from Botafogo. But Nascimento, unproven in this league, probably going to take some time to get acclimated. Christian Ramirez, a different type of profile than Jovic in terms of the type of striker he is, and still have to see really how he fits into this system that they run. But it's still a weekend side without Ricky Puig, and that's literally an irreplaceable player. But you still have Marco Reus, Gabriel Peck, Diego Fagundes. That's enough offensive creativity to, I think, get by San Diego in this one. Despite the fact I think San Diego won't have a terrible season, this is just too big of a task, I think, for them in their first match here. They have obviously a pretty decent front line, I think. That's to why I don't think they're going to be bottom of the barrel in the West. Obviously, Chucky Lozano, but they have Ingvartsen and now Dreyer as their other DP. An okay enough midfield, and I think they can make this game challenging, but I think they're going to ship goals, especially to the Galaxy, in the type of game this probably pans out to be. I just think it's too much for San Diego in its first game. I think Galaxy, despite the players they're missing, which will probably hurt them long-term this season, I think they'll be fine in this one. They're going to be the first game back defending their championship, and I'm going to go for a 2-1 win for the LA Galaxy. So that's all 15 matchups covered for this opening weekend of MLS. Let me know who you're most excited to watch in this 30th season of MLS and who you think is taking home some of these opening weekend matchups. And once again, guys, please make sure to like the video down below and subscribe to the channel, and go check out both conference previews that I dropped on the channel just recently in the past couple of days as well, if you want a better outlook and overall outlook on what I think is going to happen this season between both conferences. It sets up to be a tasty year and a very exciting set of opening matchups for this weekend. So once again, enjoy these matchups. We're finally back, and if you are on the betting side of things as well, best of luck, and I'll see you guys in the next video.